Open the empty mod map folder by clicking the folder icon below this video. Then save it to your local hard drive and open the i3D file. First of all, we will have to activate the terrain editing window. This can be done by clicking on Window and Terrain Editing. Open up the panel a bit wider to see all the settings properly. Now let's go over the brush panel. The top drop-down menu lets us select the terrain we want to work on. The terrain element is visible inside the scene graph. With mod maps, you usually only use one terrain. The next option changes our brush radius. Once the cursor is moved over to the scene, the current brush size is visible after activating the Terrain Sculpt mode. We can also use the mouse wheel to adjust the brush size. The opacity, hardness, and value settings can be used to change the strength and rounding of the brush while working with terrain. Opacity and value set the strength of raising and lowering the ground, and hardness is responsible for the rounding. Brush type lets us choose between a circular or square brush. The settings for LMB, MMB, and RMB stand for the left, middle, and right mouse buttons. We can assign a special function to every single one. We may choose between add, smooth, subtract, replace, and remove. Remove currently has no more use and can be ignored for now. Add will raise the ground. Smooth will smoothen it out with the surrounding terrain, while subtract will lower it. Replace lets us set a value to which the terrain will automatically raise or lower itself to. Our empty mod map is set at a value of 80. This basically means that it is around 80 meters above sea level. You may also use Replace Limit to change terrain, which is either above or below this point. Pressing Ctrl and R will pick the selected value for replacing automatically. By the way, any other shortcuts can be found in the SDK folder or by clicking Help and Keyboard Shortcuts. Switch to Terrain Sculpt mode by clicking here. We will create a small lake and a hill next to it. Select a brush radius of 5 and set opacity, hardness, and value to a desired setting for our lake. In this case, we can also use a replace value smaller than 80, and then create the lake with the replace function mapped to the right mouse button. Afterwards, we might also smoothen out the edges a bit with the Smooth tool. Now, let's create the hill. Just play around with the values a little bit further, or set the replace value to something higher than 80, and then use the replace tool once more. Maybe even create a little driveway or road. Let your creative self go wild. Afterwards, you can smoothen out the edges once more. Thanks to the Replace tool, we now also have a small plateau, on which we may even place a field later on. Now let's bring some color to this map. Have a look at the Texture Layer Painting panel here. Just as we use the brush for terrain editing, we will now use it for texture painting, and adjust the brush size accordingly with the mouse wheel. The hardness, opacity, and value settings have no function while painting textures and can be ignored. Slope limit start and slope limit end let us only include certain angles we want to paint textures on. This is especially handy when painting mountain slopes or cliffs. Put slope start limit to a higher value than 0 to achieve this. The values can be seen as degrees, and their default values are 0 for the start and 90 for the end limit. In the drop-down menu labeled Texture Layer, we are able to choose the texture we want to paint with. Activate the Terrain Detail Texture Paint mode and choose a dark earthen texture for the lake floor and a wet sand texture for the lake's shores. Set the left mouse button to add and start painting. For the hillside, we can use the slope values to only paint the cliffside. Let's use a slope start value of 30 degrees and 50 degrees for the end value. Feel free to add yet another pavement texture for the area between the lake and hill, so we can place our starting farm here later. Once we are done, we deactivate the Terrain Detail Texture Paint mode. The only thing that's still missing now is the actual lake. To create a water surface for the lake, we have to create a new water plane via Create, Primitive, and Plane. Now the object plane has been created in the scene graph over here. This is a one-sided surface, which consists of only 2 polygons, and is currently still located at 0, 0, 0 on the map. To place the plane to a specific position, select the plane in the scene graph and then press Ctrl and B once. Then let go and click inside the lake. The plane will now have moved to where we just clicked. Be sure to rename the plane to Water Plane by selecting it and renaming it in the Attributes window. Currently, the plane is still far too small, but by clicking on these points and dragging them across the screen, we are able to rescale our plane. We can do the same in the Attributes window to the right by changing the values in the Scale X and Scale Z options. By clicking and dragging the pivot arrows, we can adjust the water plane's position and height. Next up, let's right-click on the water plane in the scene graph and select Freeze Transformations. Deselect all except for Scale, since we changed this. Now our new values are the new standard values of this object, as you can see on the ones here in the Attributes window. Close the Freeze Transformation window afterwards. Our water surface still needs a normal map and a shader. To add them, click on Window and enable the Material Editing window. Select the plane in the scene graph and import a normal map with this button over here. Navigate to the water_normal.dds file we already added to the map files for you. It can be found here. Close this window afterwards. The editor will throw a warning, reminding us that we still need to activate the Tangents attribute for the water plane. We can do this by clicking on the Shapes panel and activating the Tangents checkbox here. Add a custom shader by opening the Custom Shader panel in the Material Editing window and click on the Replace or Add a New Shader button Next, navigate to the oceanshader.xml located here. Shaders, oceanshader.xml. To declare an actual water surface in the game, we need a script callback. Let's click on Window and User Attributes. In the Type drop-down menu, select Script Callback and then type onCreate into the name box here. This will call the predefined script function onCreate from the base game at game start. Now all that's left to do is click on Add and enter the term environment.onCreateWater into the newly added line above and press Enter. That's it. We have now created a proper starting scenario for our new farm. A lake with a functioning water plane, as well as a small hill, some roads, and an area on which to place the farm on later.